gather around. What I want you to do now is imagine that you've found a perfect park, that you've just got off the tram, or you've just got off the tram and you're walking down Lygon Street. It's quite a balmy night. And you're walking down there and you can see people that you know. You actually can see people heading in the same direction. They might be walking past their favourite bar. You might see them having a crisp Chardonnay just out there in the footpath. Or it might be that they're across the road having a coffee. But whatever it is, there's a feeling of anticipation because everybody is heading to their favourite independent bookshop. They're heading towards Readings in Carlton. And there in Readings in Carlton, as you walk through the glass doors, and there's bookshelves on either side, and you make your way to the back of that beautiful shop, you're also chatting amongst yourselves because there's some people there that you haven't seen for a while. There's some people there that you might have met at an awards night. There's some people there that you've only read their novels. You can spot the authors within the crowd. At the back of the shop, there's a few chairs set up. But you know what? In all honesty, there's not enough chairs for everyone. So people are crowded along the bookshelves. Some people have even been game enough to sit on the cold, hard tile floor of Readings. But no one minds. No one minds that they're uncomfortable because they understand that they're all here for the same reason. If you're lucky, you might be given a plastic glass filled with terrible wine. And again, you don't mind because you know that you're at the right place. You know that you are surrounded by people that are readers. Up there, just between the poetry and the self-help books, there's a microphone and there's chairs set up in front, and you see 3 wonderful women and you see me. Hello, I'm so excited to be here. My name's Christine Gordon. I am the Programming Manager of Readings. And on this occasion, I'd like to also let you know that I'm completely honoured to be one of the founding members of Stella. And we are here, of course, to celebrate and acknowledge the good work of Stella over the past 10 years. Welcome, everybody. Before we get going, before we start considering all the stories that the Stella Prize has given us, all the different memories, all the different opportunities that the Stella has brought to the women of Australia, to the women of the world, I want us to acknowledge that wherever we are in Australia, right here, right now, you're living on land that's not ours. You're living on land that's stolen. And I know there's lots of talk when we do these kind of acknowledgements of country. And the correct thing for me to say is that, hello, I'm speaking from the Kulin Nation, and I give my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. But I also want to take this moment to say that perhaps that's not enough. Perhaps it's not enough just to acknowledge that we're on stolen ground or country. Perhaps we should all take this moment to reflect that these First Nations people have given us opportunities to understand the country that we live in. And so not only do we give respect, but surely we have to give gratitude as well. So on behalf of all of you, wherever you are in Australia, wherever you are, I want to pay my respects and give my gratitude to the First Nations people. When I was asked to chair this event, I thought that one of the lovely things that we could do is share some of our favourite poems. And so I want to start this night by saying, isn't it terrific that the Stella movement is actually changing and they're now going to be including poetry. But as we give this sort of acknowledgement of country, I reckon I need to read something from this fantastic collection of poems, Dropbear by Evelyn Araluen. And she's written a book, and pardon me, she's written a poem that is actually called Acknowledgement of Cuntery. And I know you'll forgive me as I read these last 2 verses. I would like to wear your flag on shirt and tote and Facebook filter. I'd like to graffiti your suburbs with your flag. Would like to ask you about the Constitution. Would like to acknowledge that I'm asking. I'd like to acknowledge the decades of struggle. I would like from communities I don't drive through. I would like to blame you for your vote and apologise that I didn't bring enough flyers to your suburbs, to your homes. I'd like to be invited to your homes to pay my respects, my acknowledgements. I would like all this acknowledged and to remind everyone that we are meeting on land stolen and remind everyone how sad it is. You all died. To remind everyone that you're all dead or stolen or silent. How sad it is. I would like respect and acknowledgement for all this respect and acknowledgement. That's from Dropbear, and it's a brilliant poem. So now I get to welcome you. Claire, hello.
Hello.
Claire, just let the audience know where you are right now.
I'm speaking to you from Ghana country. I'm in my caravan in Adelaide. I was supposed to be back in Melbourne by now, but we blew the engine of our Land Cruiser in Alice Springs and got kind of stuck, and now we're in Adelaide. And really, what's the point of returning to Melbourne anyway?
Listen, it's still there. It's still not the Melbourne that we love at this stage.
No.
Carrie, hello.
Hi, Chris.
So lovely to have you here with us.
Thank you.
And hello, Emily.
Hi.
Emily and Carrie, you're both in Melbourne, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Such a treat. So what I want us to reflect on is over the last 10 years, the Stella Prize seems to have made a considerable contribution to the literary landscape. Can you remember a time, and let's start with you, Emily, can you remember a time when it was first started? Do you remember in any way this sort of memory that all of a sudden there was going to be this excitement, there was going to be a prize that was for women writers?
Yeah, I do actually. I remember very clearly being super excited about the idea of the prize, and also I think what really sticks in my memory is the statistics that, you know, Stella kind of made me aware of, that, you know, I hadn't really kind of fully been aware of before, about, you know, things like the percentage of women that had won or been shortlisted for the Miles Franklin in the past however many decades, and the number of reviews that female writers were getting as opposed to male writers. And so it was kind of an excitement about the prize, but also like a shock about, you know, the level of inequality that I hadn't actually probably quite clocked myself.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a shock. And I remember that 10 years ago when the Stella Prize was, well, just over 10 years ago when we were talking about the Stella Prize, it was just that particular year that the Miles Franklin Award had an all-male list. And it really shocked us to the core that this could happen in a country where we thought that we were striving for such equality, thought that we'd achieved it. Turns out, no. What about you, Carrie? Can you remember talking about the Stella Prize and being involved? I mean, look,
I don't actually remember being very aware of it beforehand, because, you know, it's the first year and it was the sort of, there was a lot of generation, a lot of things kind of happening behind the scenes. And so, no, I wasn't kind of tremendously aware of it. And I have to admit, you know, I've come to writing kind of later in life, and as we're talking with Claire before about the Northern Territory thing, my earlier career was as a park ranger starting in the Northern Territory, and when I started up there, there were 100 male rangers and 3 women. So my daily life was really a bit of a battlefield against some pretty sort of active physical discrimination. And so when I started writing, I met this tremendous community of very supportive and kind of wonderful, mainly women, very early on. When I was studying writing, I did a master's, and I just thought it was fabulous. And I just thought these people were great. And I felt, you know, this was where I wanted to be very much. So I wasn't overly aware of the lack of opportunities and the discrimination. But I had also had some experience with the Orange Prize in the UK. So my first novel was shortlisted for the Orange Prize in the UK, and I was taken to London and did kind of fabulous things with the other women on the shortlist. And I could see the tremendous respect for the prize in the UK. It's very prestigious. It's now been going for 25 years, I think, last year. And a really sort of strong sense that it was taken very seriously. And I'm afraid that wasn't my experience when the Stella was first announced in Melbourne. And I did experience quite a lot of backlash and quite a lot of negativity in the few months when I was doing publicity after the award. Like, the night was fabulous. It was kind of electric and wonderful. And
I have a very clear memory of that awards night, because I remember watching your children when you won, and they were so proud. They were just teenagers at the time, and young teenagers, and your son in particular was blown away. And I remember he just kind of put his hands up in his hair. He was sort of rocking. He was so excited for you.
Oh, that's lovely. I was probably distracted. I didn't see that. But yeah, so the night was wonderful. There was a sense that things were kind of tremendous. But then the next day there was an editorial in The Age that said, is the Stella winner really Stella? Is this book really any good when there are no men in the field? And it was really bitter, and it was really mean. And there was quite a bit of stuff. There was a lot of patronizing stuff. You know, I got headlines, Mitchum mum of 2 wins writing prize. The Australian called my novel Bush Romance wins writing prize. You know, I think if the same book had been written by Tim Winton or Peter Carey, it would have been some sort of forensic investigation of nature and desire. But because I wrote it, it was a bush, and it won a women's writing prize. It's a bush romance tale. So there was a sense that people were uncomfortable. They didn't know how to encompass it. There was a sense of threat around it. And my book, as well as a couple of other books that were on the shortlist that year, went on to be shortlisted for the Miles Franklin, which that year, first year ever, and I'm sure was related to Stella, was an all-female shortlist. And we had to do quite a lot of events around that. It was won by fabulous Michelle de Kretzer that year. And there was a sense that, you know, they were kind of uncomfortable and weren't really sure how to accommodate this kind of new prize, and really sort of took it as a criticism.
You know what I say? Thank goodness that they took it that even as seriously as that there had to be a backlash, that there had to be some sort of, you know, it's like the bullies just had to have their say before they could accept. The Miles Franklin, you know that the Stella Prize was, of course, named with tongue-in-cheek because of Miles Franklin. Stella is Miles Franklin's first name. What about you, Claire? Can you remember sort of your experiences of finding out about the Stella Prize and being shortlisted for it? What was that like?
Well, I came into writing quite late in life, relatively late in life as well. Terra Nullius was my first ever long work that I'd ever written. In fact, my first completed published work in my entire life. So I had no connection with the writing community, and that was the book that got shortlisted for the Stella. So from having no communication with the writing community, I was treated to a prize that until that point, until I was longlisted, I had essentially never heard of the Stella Prize. And the only reason I knew of literary prize at all was because people I knew had won some literary prizes. So out of the blue, I was listed for this prize that, like I said, I didn't really know existed because I didn't know anything about the literary world. I wrote Terra Nullius completely cold with no training, no education, and no contact with the literary world at all. But then that experience of being longlisted for a prize for literature was possibly one of the more profound endorsements that I could do this. That this thing that I decided to do on a whim was something I could actually do. The first time I knew that was when I was longlisted for the Stella Prize, and then I was shortlisted for the Stella Prize. But sadly, I didn't win.
I think it's a tremendous achievement to be shortlisted or longlisted. I think it's a tremendous achievement to have written a book, actually. Claire, did you suffer from any backlash?
No, not really. Perhaps because, well, if there's any backlash, it was because my book, Terra Nullius, was speculative fiction. And I don't think at that point, speculative fiction books had made it to any of the major prizes at that point. I think the year I was shortlisted was the first time that any spec fic had been shortlisted for the Stella Prize. And it was also the first year that a speculative fiction novel had been longlisted for the Miles Franklin Award the same year. And two of us were the first people to be listed for both the Science Fiction Award and the Stella Prize in the same year with the same book. So there was a bit of backlash on that, but there wasn't any backlash on the Stella Prize because the Stella Prize, by the time I was shortlisted, was already like many years old and already had some quite eminent and successful books win the prize. So I think the backlash was kind of over by that point.
Mm. And what about for you, Emily? How was your experience?
I think I definitely had some weird conversations with people, more like sort of in a one-on-one at events and things. And I will say all men that just kind of wanted to have a conversation with me after I'd won the prize about whether it was necessary, whether I really felt like it was worthwhile to win a prize that was supposedly on merit, but was only kind of, taking out 50% of the competition. Some quite confronting conversations, which, to be honest, I didn't really quite know how to respond to, being a fairly green debut writer. I just sort of nodded and smiled and went and hung out with the rest of the writers, and we all had a bit of grumble about it later. But yeah, so I think, there was definitely a sort of sense of, is this just kind of affirmative action? Is this really an endorsement if it's kind of, you have to be kind of cut out half of the population to be able to kind of be shortlisted or longlisted or win.
It's so interesting, isn't it, these type of backlashes that happen when there's when women are putting themselves forward like this, because it seems to me that that they don't that those people that criticize this type of innovation don't understand that the playing field was not equal.
Yeah, exactly.
That they don't acknowledge that the pain of not being on an equal landscape is actually quite destroying to many, many people.
Mm-hmm.
Carrie, is that something that you had to argue against? And now that the Stella Prize is so much part of our literary landscape, and I believe is completely endorsed by the world, do you feel like those sort of attitudes are changing? Do you feel like that they're the sort of questions or the backlash that you would receive now?
I'd be really surprised now. I think Stella has really changed it. I think the immense kind of popularity of the prize, the kind of community groundswell of interest in it, you can't argue with it. And also, when I was sort of faced with things like Emily, I just talk really about history and say, well, in the last 100 years, there's so much catching up to do. Like, have women really had the opportunities for education, the opportunities to participate in culture, the time in their lives away from their other duties and responsibilities, to be able to work creatively, and the confidence, the education, all of these different things. So there's an enormous amount of catching up to do, and this is not going to happen in a short amount of time. You know, there's so many books that didn't get written that, you know, we still need to be written. And that's exciting, I think. So sort of Stella's really opened that gate. In fact, Stella has smashed the wall out of the building, I think, rather than open the gate.
That's a tremendous thing to say. And I feel like that everybody that's watching and listening right now should take that quote and use it as often as they can. So one of the sort of the challenges that the Stella Prize has always faced is making sure that the short list and the long list is in the hands of the readers. And I know that when we were establishing what we wanted from something like this, we were very much considering we needed books and stories written by women that could be sold. And I know that the Stella Prize has been very successful in having any book that's been shortlisted or longlisted or indeed won, Emily and Carrie, has actually gone on to sell a tremendous amount of copies. And it seems to me that those copies then have an afterlife. For you, Claire, did you notice that when you were shortlisted that more copies were sold of your book?
Absolutely. When the first shortlisting first happened, there was a massive spike in sales. And that surprised me. I wasn't aware of the kind of spike that what these things actually bring about in sales. But it's also true that Terra Nullius has had an extraordinary longevity. It still sells large numbers of books even now. It's been out like 5 years, and it's still selling quite well. And perhaps surprise listings were part of that as well. Most people I know who've written are getting decent sales, like even a couple of years later, but I'm still getting decent sales 5 years later. And I think the award listing must have had something to do with that.
Well, the Stella people do so much work behind the scenes to make sure that these stories are out and about in the community and to make sure that they stay in the public eye. So I think when we think of the Stella Prize, we shouldn't just think of that awards night, of that long list, of that short list. We should think about the fact that this is an organisation now that is making sure that there are continuous readers of women's fiction and non-fiction, and now poetry. Fantastic. So now after 10 years, the Stella people have decided, and I think wisely and kindly, to include poetry in their long list and their short list. To celebrate that, I'm wondering whether you, Claire, have bought one of your favourite poems that you could share with us.
I don't have many books of poetry with me. I only have a couple. I have tons at home, but I'm not at home. I have this one, but I'm not going to. Same. But I've also got this one in my caravan.
They're gorgeous.
In which I do have a poem I'd like to read. I think it kind of fits the theme of this evening. It's called White Excellence. When it comes to having white people in my life, I choose the cream of the crop. Not your average woke bloke. I'm talking about white excellence. White people at the top of their game. You know, the ones you meet and you're like, who's trained you? If you're a white fellow in my life, you've gone through a very rigorous selection process. Congrats. And to be honest, babe, I'm still testing you. White excellence comes in many forms, but my favourites are the ones that cook for me. Listen, make space, buy black books, buy black music. Never assume to know what we think or what we want. Have the difficult conversations. Pick up the slack. Share the physical and emotional labour. White excellence acknowledges other ways of being. White excellence should be a filter on Tinder. White excellence make good guests because they know they are permanent visitors. And that was White Excellence by Evelyn Araluen from Throat.
It's perfect. It's an absolutely perfect choice. I loved it. You can buy copies, of course, of Throat and Dropbear at your favourite independent bookshop. While we're talking about poetry, Carrie, have you got a favourite poem by an Australian woman that you could share with us?
I have something recent too, but I did want to mention when the year of my shortlist, Lisa Jacobson was shortlisted for a verse novel that was called The Sunlit Zone. And Claire, I actually think it's spec fiction, The Sunlit Zone. I don't know if you know it, but it's a really interesting book. So, you know, this is really a work of poetry that is in that beautiful space, that beautiful verse novel space. So I think Stella did start out with some history there, and I'm pretty sure some other verse novels have been included in the prize as well, but it was quite, you know, to actually shortlist a verse novel in the very first year of the prize, I thought was fabulous. I thought it was really innovative. So I just wanted to draw attention to that one. But I'm going to read to you a tiny bit from a poem from this fabulous, quite newly published collection of the Victorian Finnish-Australian poet Maria Takalander. It's called Trigger Warning. It's really kind of smart and kooky and fabulous. It's very kind of challenging. It's also really funny and quite sort of droll. So this is a little piece from a poem called Knox, which is addressed to the poet Anne Carson. I did not invent the typewriter, but at some point in the high school typing pool, it secretly invented me. AAA space BBB. Before I was silent as a rabbit beneath the zigzagging steel of the classroom ceiling, enthralled by that Pythagorean heaven. Then, suddenly, a surge of electricity. The machine was oneroic, like good Gothic technology. It brought words to my fingertips. Words, 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 to be purified through mathematics. I really love this kind of literalness of language. Like, I know as writers, we're interested in metaphor and we're interested in imagery, but I'm as a writer really also interested in the concreteness of language and the kind of literalness of what words mean, and this work of moving words around in sentences. And I think Maria's really kind of interested in that too. So that really speaks to me. I think it's a fabulous collection.
It really is. It really is. Thank you so much for sharing that. Quite powerful words, and it makes sense to me that you would like those, the sort of the mix of the literary and the maths. I can see all that in you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Emily, I know choosing a poem is so difficult, isn't it? When you look at the Australian poets that we have been all fortunate enough to read, making a decision is actually one of the hardest parts. One of the I guess the challenges that I asked of you. How did you go?
Yeah, good. I chose nepotism. I was going to go for a classic of Australian literature, but I thought I would go for something a bit more contemporary, and I chose, admittedly, a friend, Sarah Holland-Batt, but I think she's one of the most incredible poets writing today. And the poem I'm going to read of hers is called This Landscape Before Me. This landscape before me is unwritten, though it has lived in violence. First, the factory stood, quiet as an asylum. Then the annihilating mallee, with its red fists of blossoms and the mountain ash creeping over it like a stain. I have no proof, but I tell you, there were lead-light windows here once, barred. They cast a little striped light on the women. Now, in scrub and yellow broom, I stand on a history braided and unbraided by stiff Irish wrists. The rope and span and carded wool are unpicked, as are the faces and names. Londonderry, Cork, Galway, Kildare. As I say the words, they are sucked away to a hemisphere in darkness. I will not presume to say what suffering is or how it was meted out in this place. At what point it breaks a body, I cannot tell. But this morning I saw a young rabbit, hunched in brush and shadow. I saw its lesioned face, its legs too thin to scramble, the bloodberry red and pink scab of its eye. It had caught the disease we brought here for it and wanted a quiet place to die. And it was lucky, or as lucky as it would get. There was time and light. The hawks and dogs had not been written yet and were still out of sight.
Emily, that was so beautifully read. Thank you so much for sharing. Absolutely gorgeous. Emily, we're running out of time, but I want to ask everyone this question. I'm going to start with you. A twofold question. The first one is, why do you write? And what's your earliest memory of writing?
I mean, my earliest memory of writing would be very, very early. I used to write newspapers for my mum. I would basically kind of staple together reams of paper and write headlines that were normally about like bank robbers and draw pictures of people with sacks of gold with dollar signs on them, and then I would write the whole newspaper from, you know, the headlines to the sports section. Yep.
Did you include the weather?
Not sure about that. I think I might have left the weather out. It wasn't exciting enough. But yeah, that was my kind of earliest memory, and I guess why I write. I'm a pretty sort of angsty person, I would say, and just to get very, very serious here. I don't know. Like I think a lot about what is the point of life. What can we do with our time that feels kind of genuinely meaningful? And to me, books, you know, have been the thing that have given me so much joy and solace and inspiration and meaning in life. And so I guess, you know, spending time trying to kind of contribute to the world of books and writing and ideas just seems like it's something that, well, A, I will never ever get bored of it because it's so challenging, and B, it just feels genuinely like a meaningful way of spending my time. So,
can you remember what it was like getting your first book published?
It was kind of terrifying. My best mate's constantly reminding me of, because I wrote the strays when I was doing a creative writing PhD, and she says we were going for a walk, and I was like, I just hope that someone will publish my book. That's all I want in life. But I just had no idea what that really entailed. And I'm a very kind of introverted writer type, so I am not so great at this public part of it.
I reckon you're pretty good, Emily. Did being in with that first novel and being, you know, longlisted, shortlisted, and then winning the Stella Prize, did it change your life?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. I mean, we were talking about book sales before, and, you know, kind of very quick way of demonstrating what it did for me was that the strays sold the same amount pretty much in the first 2 weeks after I won the prize as it had in the year before, because it was almost exactly a year after it was published. So it was just kind of, you know, took it to a whole new level. I managed to get the book sold overseas, you know, directly as a result of the Stella Prize. And I think, you know, it's really helped me kind of make that really quite difficult move, I think, from debut writer to, you know, starting to be established writer. Yeah, just having that endorsement for my debut has made an enormous difference.
I'm so glad. I reckon everybody here in the audience is so glad as well. What about you, Claire? Why do you write?
I started writing because I was compelled to. The story that became Terra Nullius kind of mugged me, and it was there, and I had to finish it. I felt like I didn't have any volition in the writing of Terra Nullius. Like, it had to be written, and it was coming out through me, whether I wanted to or not. So I had to write it. And then I continue to write, because when I wrote Terra Nullius, I think I discovered at 41 years old, the only thing in life that I'm apparently any good at. Because every other thing I tried in life before that, I did terribly at it. But I wrote that book and it did well, and ever since then, struggled at the career. So now, and I still love it. I love writing with a passion, but if I stopped writing, I don't know what I would actually do for a job. It's the only job I'm suited for.
We are completely delighted that you keep writing. Your internet is giving us a little bit of trouble, but just as a final question, I want to ask you, Claire, is it, do you think your involvement with the Stella Prize, has it changed your life?
I think it has. It certainly created more interest in Terra Nullius. It could be the reason why I got a publishing deal for my second novel, The Old Lie. It could be why I've just published my third book. So I'm not sure if my second or third books would have been published without Terra Nullius. So it's almost certainly had at least some impact. Whether or not it changed my life, I don't know. I don't know whether writing changed my life, except it gave me, I found things I'm good at. But if writing has changed my life profoundly, then the Stella Prize, like every other kind of measurement of the fact that I can actually write, has changed my life.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. And what about for you, Carrie? Why do you write?
It's a really difficult question, but
it's a broad question.
It's a really difficult question. I think like Em and like Claire, because reading's been tremendously important to me, and it's, you know, been life sustaining. There's a sense that in a book you can really know someone. You know, you can know someone in a way that you can't really know people in real life. And so I think to be able to write is a way of communicating, being able to express meaning, but from a place of concealment. And for some reason that really appeals to me, that I'm not doing it on some soapbox. I'm sort of not really doing it as me, but it is clearly is me, but I'm using, you know, this fabulous form of the novel to express meaning. And this sense of, you know, that I have when I read something fabulous, that those characters are alive in me. You know, when you just finish something great, you just finish some wonderful book, and there's that sense that you're carrying that character around in you for a while, and you're experiencing the world kind of through them. Like you're there, but somehow they're there as well at the same time. And to me, that's really incredible. That's an amazing thing that humans can do through this thing called reading. And it's really about empathy. It's through this that we kind of learn what it is to be someone else, and to be sort of, you know, to breach the skin and really know what it feels like to be someone else. So that for me is very exciting, and that's sort of the reason I continue to write. I'm not sure exactly if that was kind of generative, but yeah.
Did winning that first Stella Prize 10 years ago, did it change your life?
Oh, absolutely. Like the in the first 3 months after the Stella, I did, I think, 58 events. And the Stella, the good women of the Stella, Chris, and all the other fabulous good women of the Stella, sold a series of lectures to Australian universities before the prize was even announced. So once the prize was announced, I was informed, now, would you mind also going around to all these universities and giving these lectures, which I can see was really important for the prize, and to sort of really use this impetus and around it really well. But I'd never given a lecture in my life, and I had to stand on my hind legs and write these lectures and think about them. And that was very challenging for me, but I think also really kind of valuable, and led to kind of other writing that I did because of that as well. So, and I'm sure, look, you know, the book that I wrote after is probably considered quite a difficult book, and I'm sure the fact that my Mateship with Birds, my second novel that won the prize, got some attention through the Stella, meant that, you know, people were more open to reading this later book as well. So that's really important.
Thank you so much, the three of you, for sharing those memories, but also sharing those experiences, for letting us all into a world that you haven't let everybody into before, even through your writing. I know that everyone here that's listening to this appreciates that. The Stella Prize always set out to challenge and champion the writing of women. It was always the aim, and it seems to me that they have not lost sight of that, the good people of the Stella. They work tirelessly to make sure that women's stories are still on everybody's agenda. As a feminist, as everyone here I'm sure shares with me, this work involves all of us. This work is important for all of us. I am delighted to have been able to acknowledge 10 years of Stella Prize with you, Claire, you, Emily, and you, Carrie, a treat for me on this Thursday night. To all of you out there, do keep reading, do stay safe. Tomorrow I will send through the titles of the books of poetry so that you can all go out and start reading poetry more, because I imagine you already do. But to all of you out there, I ask you to take on the role as a Stella ambassador. So I ask you to make sure that you read and talk about women's work, that you read and talk about women writers. Good night, everyone. Stay safe. Thank you so much.